All right. Can you guys see the participants?
No.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you open up participants, you can see
Oh, I
panelists
can
on the
see it.
left. And yeah, okay, good. I'm sorry, I made it smaller. Let me make it bigger. All right, let's get started. All right, it is 11:30 a.m. We want to welcome you. We would ask that you please type questions into the chat box. We're going to answer as many as possible during the webinar, and we're going to follow up to answer any that we are unable to get to. What you see here is the contact information for our three speakers, and you will see this again in just a few minutes. All right, so the topic today, opportunity zones. We're going to talk a little bit about 1.0, the current designated 25 census tracts in Delaware, and we're going to transition into 2.0, the new and exciting opportunities that await us. This is for all Delaware investors, developers, attorneys, accountants, property owners, realtors, lenders, elected and appointed officials. We are on this journey together. We look forward to working with you throughout the process. If you are interested in nominating a specific census tract, we created a nomination form. The one request that I have, we're not going to spend any time from a technical perspective on how to nominate here. We want to spend all the time getting the information we can from Rob and Brad. But so send me an email if you have questions. The one thing I will ask is that every federal agency, whether it's U.S. Census, IRS, Treasury, they will all use the full 11 digits. This example is Everest Steel site, the old Everest Steel site.
Patty, I'm sorry, we can't see your slides.
Oh, you can't see my slides. Thank you. Oh my gosh. How did I do that? Let me go back. I forgot to share screen. I have to escape, I guess, to do that. I am so sorry. Thank you, Andrea. So glad you're with us. Share screen. Let's go back. All right, I apologize. Here we are again. Please type your questions into the chat box. There's your contact information. Again, opportunity zones. I'm so sorry. I can't figure out how to make the other top go away. For all of you in Delaware who serve in any of these roles, we are in this together and look forward to working with you. Here's the most important. When you're nominating a census tract, use all 11 digits. The first two digits tell a federal agency it's in Delaware. The next three digits tell them which county it's in. The remaining 6 digits tell them exactly which census tract you're talking about. If you go to a county or a municipality website, you might see that they drop a leading 0. You might see that they add a couple of decimal points. So the only way that we all know for sure that we are speaking about the same census tract is if you use all 11 digits. And if in fact you are an investor and you make an investment and you are filing forms with the IRS to say, I want this treated as a qualified opportunity zone, they're going to be looking for those full 11 digits. So let's begin the habit today of using those. With that, I want to introduce our speakers. Rob Herrera is pretty well known across the state of Delaware. He's an investor, he's a developer, and most importantly, he's a husband and a father, but also he is the co-chair of the Delaware Prosperity Partnership Board of Directors, and they oversee economic development efforts across the state of Delaware. So we're really excited to have Rob with us today. Brad Malatsky. Brad is an attorney with Dwayne Morris, who in 2018, many of you met as Brad and I went around and did some road shows together to try to get people excited about opportunity zones. Brad has actually been involved in a couple of projects here in Delaware, and he's done hundreds, if not thousands, across the country of all shapes and sizes. What we enjoy most about Brad is that when we ask him a question, we get an answer that talks about where the rubber meets the road, where you need to hear the answer. So we're very excited about that. This slide you will see again at the end. When there is a 5-minute, we only have 5 minutes left, I will put this slide up as a reminder to our speakers that in fact they only have 5 minutes. If there are points they needed to make or really were eager to make, that's the opportunity for them to do it, and it will give you the contact information again. So with that, I am going to stop sharing now and hand it over to Brad and Rob. Take us away.
Thank you, guys. And I'll reiterate, I'm a developer. I've done 2 opportunity zone projects, but I'm far from a specialist in opportunity zones. I think I'll leave that up to Brad, but I have a lot of questions and I'll be learning along with the group here. So Brad, I'm going to kick it off here with looking back at the first round of opportunity zones. What worked better than expected and what clearly needed improvement?
Okay, we'll go with so hello everybody. By the way, for those from the University of Delaware, that is me. I'm very excited to be wearing my yellow and blue for today. So it was a long time ago. I kind of even had hair back then, kind of. Anyway, I'll go with things that didn't work, Rob. I think that I've spoken to a lot of people over the last, whatever the heck it was, since 2018. And I'm still amazed that people who are smart real estate people and smart people otherwise are unaware of the OZ program. So I think that between the federal government, state government, we could have done much better at educating the consumer, i.e. the investor and or developers like you, as to what the program was and what the benefits are and why we're using the program. So I think education sorely lacking, and still necessary. I think there are some solves that folks thought were going to happen as part of OZ 2.0. So a bunch of people are whining, is probably a strong word, but whining about you can't have an opportunity zone fund invest in another opportunity zone fund. So that's kind of a behind the scenes technical thing, but it's sort of.
Whoops, Patty, did we lose Brad for a
Where the
second?
zones are eligible, and then
Yeah, Brad, I'm sorry, you froze for a second.
Okay. I don't know where I froze, but I just kept talking anyway. So anyway, what I was saying is the education was lacking. So we need better education relative to state, federal, to the consumer, the investor. Separately, fund to fund doesn't work, so that still needs to be fixed. Third, I think there were bipartisan support for OZs, and that continues to this day, despite kind of what the nonsense you see in Washington. But one of the things that was put forth in bipartisan legislation it was passed, but it wasn't ever enacted, was, when we look at these zones, they're based on socioeconomic demographic data. Okay, everybody kind of gets that. Well, the folks that are left out on that are zero population areas, meaning areas that don't have housing. So if you have an area that doesn't have housing, you're likely ineligible. Why? Because there's no demographic data. Same thing applies to, if you think about like former industrial sites. If those industrial sites are not part of a census tract that has the right demographic, it's very difficult, if not impossible, for those sites to qualify. And adding kind of insult to injury, under 2.0, which is effective as of this coming January 1/1/27, many governors were able to, under 1.0, designate these zero population areas that were adjacent to housing areas that had the right demographic. They were able to designate them under 1.0 appropriately. That ability has been removed from OZ 2.0. So contiguous adjacent sites that don't qualify will not be able to qualify under 2.0. So again, when you ask kind of what didn't work, there are still some things that Treasury's thinking about, along with the administration and HUD, as to what should we do in regulation that wasn't done in the statute. And so, those are the things to me that, will drive additional capital into these areas. I think that despite what I just said, which sounds bad, there's been a massive amount of capital invested in OZs in a relatively short period of time. So we're talking, EIG, if you guys aren't familiar with EIG, the Economic Innovation Group, has done some great studies. They have a 2.0 kind of indicative map it's worth looking at. Their studies indicate that, there's a big gap here, between 85 billion and 100 billion, so 15 billion among friends, between 85 billion and 100 billion of equity has been invested in OZ since 2018, which means that if it's equity, there's probably debt on the other side, although it's kind of hard to tell because of the lack of reporting. And so you'd sort of double that. There's at least, maybe 50% more by way of debt capital that's been invested to build buildings. So you're talking about somewhere between 200 to 250 billion dollars in a relatively short period of time has been invested in trickier areas, low income areas throughout the United States, both rural and urban, that might not have otherwise been invested in these places. So again, that to me is a massive amount of deal flow and investment that can help solidify a community, can help a community that's down on its derriere come back. It can help a community that formerly was, manufacturing, that stopped doing that and has lost population, to regain that kind of population and, area growth and community. So I think that the program has proven, for a variety of reasons, to be very successful, which is part of the reason why, for different reasons, D's and R's, Democrats and Republicans, like it, and support it. And despite, again, what I said before on Washington being a little dysfunctional, to say the least, this is one of the programs where people agree that it has done good things in a variety of places around the country.
Great. Well, picking up on a little bit of that thread, if an opportunity zone was included in the first round in 1.0, and there hasn't been any activity in that particular opportunity zone, what is the likelihood that the Treasury will renominate that track again? It's kind of tough. I know it's tough for you to answer, but just
I was going to say not a Brad answer. So let me caveat this whole thing with the nonsensical SEC thing. My views are my own. They don't represent the firm. I used to be able to say my dog believes me, my wife doesn't. My dog passed away, so no one believes me. So just take whatever I say with a grain of salt. I truly believe it, but as my wife tells me, just because I believe it doesn't make it so. Although it is so. Just you need to, between me and you. Okay, so. What question? 1.0 zones, nothing's happened. Are they likely to be redesignated? A couple answers. One, is the zone still eligible? Does the demographic of that zone still meet the test? The test under 2.0 got harder. Under 1.0, it was 80% of median family income. Under 2.0, it's 70%, meaning it's harder to qualify in 2.0. So A, Rob, you'd have to have the zone still qualify. B, you'd have to have the governor of that applicable state in that particular zone objectively think, well, if I redesignate this, nothing happened during the first program. Why would I redesignate that if nothing happened? They want to have success when they designate something. They want to see activity. So without some level of assurance, if I'm the governor, which I would never be, if I'm the governor, I'd want to know that, hey, permits have been applied for, money's been spent, infrastructure might be better than it was, 7 years ago. There's a commitment, they've got financing in place. So something to show me that this project is moving along, as opposed to we're just hoping. So right. I think those are the things that, if the folks on the call and others are thinking about applying and or advocating, you're going to want to show some level of support from the mayor or the county of where the zone is. And you're going to want to show that you're not starting from ground zero, that you've made progress, or somebody's probably going to look at that and say, well, why should we designate this versus something different?
Great. We'll pick up on that again in a little bit, but just high level now, as we kind of go into 2.0, for those in the audience who may not follow the federal tax policy closely like you do, what are the most important what are the most important changes proposed in Opportunity Zone 2.0 compared to the original program?
Okay, so let's
there's a lot there.
There's a lot of confusion on this out there in the marketplace. So let's start with timing. 2.0 starts 1/1/27. 1/1/27. So in the blink of an eye, at the end of 27, I'm sorry, at the end of beginning of 27, 2.0 it will start. That's different than gains that happen in 26 could still be invested in a fund in 27 and count as 2.0 money. Okay, now there's a timing thing that your audience likely aware of. If you're an individual, it's 180 days from your gain event. If you're an entity, it's 180 days from the latest date, which is March 15th, the day you're required to file the entity's tax return without extension, plus 180 days. So we've got a timing issue of 180 days to get you into 2.0. When's your gain? And then you've got kind of an entity versus individual thing. Okay. So, kind of back to the question of what's the benefit? Well, all things being equal, which of course they never are, one would prefer to be in 2.0 versus 1.0 if you can get there. Why? So to your question, this is like the big lead up here. In
Yeah.
2.0, unlike 1.0, the investor, the person with the gain, gets a rolling 5-year deferral on payment of tax on their gain. Okay, so in 1.0, you got a set time frame till the end of 2026, 12/31/2026. In 2.0, so long as you meet your 180-day timing thing, you get a rolling 5-year deferral from when you put money into a fund, your own fund or a third party's fund. So if you invested in 1.0 right now, you get deferral through the end of this year, which is kind of it's like a non-entity. You know, you're paying the same year you would have otherwise paid. 2.0, you get a rolling 5 years. 1.0 originally had a 15% reduction benefit if you invested in 2018 or 2019. It had a 10% reduction benefit if you invested in 20 or 21. If somebody invests right now, today, 2026, they get no reduction benefit under 1.0. Under 2.0, if you invest and you hold for 5 years or more, you get a 10% reduction benefit. So again, apples to apples, you get a 5-year deferral in 2.0 longer than you get in 1.0 right now. You get a 10% reduction in 2.0, you get no reduction in 1.0. Same benefits on hold for 10 years, sell thereafter within 30 years, no tax on sale, no capital gains tax, no matter what the sales price, no cap, so that's good. And you get no depreciation recapture. That benefit, again, is a longer conversation, but what many folks, smart investors, are not getting yet is this depreciation recapture benefit is a big thing. You know, everyone's getting depreciation, you know, under the code appropriately. As part of the OB3, the One Big Beautiful Bill, that depreciation, bonus depreciation, was modified. So bonus depreciation is back all across the United States, OZ and non-OZ. But the interesting thing about OZs is if we're building in an OZ, we get bonus depreciation that will allow us to allocate depreciation to the investor, offsets income to the investor. The investor likes that. Why? Because you get cash with no tax. That's good. IRS is willing to do that. Why? Because they know in most deals, when the person sells that thing, they get recapture of that depreciation. So it's a time value of money thing. Interesting thing happens on the way to the forum in OZs, though. There is no depreciation recapture. So what happens in an OZ now in 2.0, and right now, because of the benefit happened as part of OB3 July of last year, you get depreciation allocation as an investor. So your distributions are sheltered, untaxed. That's, people like that. You sell at the end of 10 years, you don't pay on the sale price. People like that. You don't have depreciation recapture in the zone where you would have it outside the zone. So those things, along with, to your earlier question, 5-year rolling deferral, 10% reduction, add up to a cluster of benefits that the real estate still has to be a good real estate deal, or the business deal has to be a good business deal. But on top of that, the investor gets these other ancillary benefits. And so if one of Rob's projects delivered a 18% return, that's at the real estate level. These other benefits would drive you up to like a 24, 25, 26% return. So it's worth, you know, depending, about 600-700 basis points on top of the original real estate value. So capsulizing it all, in 2.0, you get a 5-year rolling deferral from when you put it in the fund. You get a 10% reduction benefit. You pay at the end of 5 years like you would have otherwise paid, the tax as reduced. You hold for 10 years, you sell, you don't pay tax on the sale, capital gains tax, and you don't pay depreciation recapture. That's the cluster of benefits that you're going to get.
Gotcha. And on 2.0, what were the additional benefits of a rural opportunity zone versus a typical one? So there'll be regular opportunity zones. I noticed there's something about rural opportunity zones, and there's an additional benefit.
Great question.
After the 5-year period, I believe, right?
Yeah. No, that's a great point. So Under 2.0 non-rural, much like 1.0, you get a 10% reduction, 10%.
Right.
TEN. I don't know why I'm like spelling things out today, but TN. If it's a rural zone, you get, instead of 10%, it's 30%. So again, 10% is interesting, 30% very interesting. You also have a lower threshold on improvements. So most people will remember, hopefully, that under 1.0, in order to get the real estate benefit, one of the tests we needed to meet was we need to substantially improve the property, meaning we need to look at the land and building value, and we need to double the building value plus $1 within 30 months. Double the building value within 30 months. So if it's a small project, not a big deal. If it's a big project, that can be tricky. If you have to spend $50 million, you buy a building worth $50 million, you got to spend another 50. That's a lot. Okay. In 2.0, if it's rural, again, we get a 30% reduction benefit. And that substantial improvement requirement is not 100%. It's lowered to 50%. Okay. So let's put that in, numbers. I'm struggling with my words today, Rob. It could be like coffee. Who knows? So let's assume we have $1 million a gain, and we're putting that $1 million a gain into a fund. Well, we would get 5 years to pay, the applicable tax on that $1 million. Okay. When we pay in 2.0, if we're in in an urban zone, non-rural, we would get a 10% reduction. 10% on $1 million would be $100,000. So we would pay on the net, meaning we'd take $1 million minus 100. We would pay on $900,000 the applicable tax rate. Call it 30%, just to make the math easy. So 30% on 900 would be like $270,000 to the federal government, whatever Delaware's do. Okay, so that's in a city. In a rural area, 50,000 people and less, 30%. So on $1 million, all of a sudden, we're not paying on $300,000. Okay, so that's off of the top. We would only pay $1 million minus the 300, or on $700,000 times our 30% tax rate. So again, $210,000. Again, the bigger the numbers, the more exciting that is. But 30% relevant versus 10%, in the cities. Again, if we spent $1 million, and just to make the math easy here, if $800,000 was our building value and 200 was the land, under 1.0, we need to double the cost of the building. So $800,000 building. We would need to spend another 800 on improving the property. Okay, 800.
Right.
In 2.0, if we are buying in a rural area, instead of having to spend 800, we only have to spend 50% of that. We would only have to spend 400. So much easier to qualify under 2.0 in a rural area. So again, rural is defined using another section of the tax code, for the tax geeks like me out there. There's mapping of this that you can go and look at and see what's eligible, but essentially it's less than 50,000 people, and you're next to an area that's not more than 50,000 people, which gets a little attenuated. So you have to kind of look at not only your city that you're in, like your town, but what's next to me. So there's certain areas like that would be rural outside of Wilmington, but because they're adjacent to Wilmington, they won't qualify as rural. Okay.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So for just walking through that real quick too, big numbers, and I'm, if I had $1 million cap gain end of 2026, early 2027, I plug it into an investment in a rural area. I defer my taxes on that, let's say 30% that I would have had to pay this year for 5 years until 2032. And in 2032, if I'm in a rural OZ, I'm only paying taxes on 700,000 then, not the $1 million.
Yes.
And then in the interim, I can claim depreciation. Let's say I built a hotel in a rural area. Maybe don't, but you get a lot of depreciation with the hotel. So all throughout that, if I'm getting distributions from that hotel, I can claim heavy depreciation, right?
Yes.
whatever
Yes.
that ends up being. I think hotels, it can be up to like 40 or 50% of depreciation because it's got a lot of FF&E, right?
Yes.
Cool.
So
So
again, there's a lot to delve into there, but yes,
yeah,
in
yeah,
short.
just high level. Yeah.
Yeah. So again,
And
you'll hear, just to clarify for a sec, the bonus depreciation benefit was not really OZ centric. It was intended to bring back manufacturing onshore. So if
right.
Rob and I are building a manufacturing facility, the rules under OB3 say you get 100 cents on the dollar immediate bonus depreciation. Okay.
Yeah.
So if we spent $100 million building a manufacturing facility, we get 100 cents on the dollar. If it was 400 million,
Oh,
400
wow.
million.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, how's that apply to everything else? We're not typically building manufacturing facilities. We're building, residential, retail, hotel, office, sort of. So we're
Yeah.
building typical stuff. Well, the rules also say if you are building a normal building and you have property which is 20-year useful life and less, you get to immediately depreciate it. So to your point, in a hotel, there's a lot of FF&E, furniture, fixtures, and equipment.
Right.
That would typically, round numbers, be about 50% of the project cost. So if we're spending $100 million, 50% would be 50 million would be eligible for depreciation immediately. If we're in a, office building, that tends to be like 30, 35%. If we're in a multifamily, it tends to be 35, 40%. So again, you're not getting 100% like manufacturing, but you're still getting a big chunk up front that you can use to offset NOI, which is why the investor gets cash,
Like free
allocation of
cash.
depreciation, and they get to not have to pay tax on that. Again, you got to make sure that your facts are the right way,
Right.
but
There's a lot of,
that,
I'm sure some nuance to that. And then
yeah,
playing
that's
that
the
through
idea.
too. So then I pay my taxes in the fifth year on $700,000. I've been claiming depreciation throughout, but then I wait till after 10 years to sell. Usually if you claim all that depreciation, you get dinged on the sale end of it, right? Because your basis.
Yes.
So now when I sell after year 10, I'm not dinged because it's all the cap gains is tax free, right?
That is absolutely correct. So that's why what I was saying before, when you sell, the real estate gives the investor a good return. This is on top of that. You're not getting hit with cap gains on the sale. You're not getting hit with
Right.
depreciation recapture, which would typically lower your yield on a return on a sale.
Right. Your yields way. Okay, that's interesting. And we loosely touched on this, so just kind of transitioning here. And again, as my understanding, so you touched on manufacturing briefly. So, like, what industries or sectors? And we always think of this as real estate too. In my understanding, it doesn't purely have to be a real estate investment either. A lot of
You're
people don't talk
100%.
about that. It didn't happen in 1.0. But do
Yes.
you
Well,
see any
no.
industries or sectors benefiting from this next phase of the program?
Okay, let's step back for half a
Oh,
second.
sorry. All right.
No, you're okay. Under 1.0, the program applies to real estate, but it also applies to businesses, which it's not that it applied, but most people didn't think that way. So
Right.
1.0, if, Rob, what's your favorite food?
Tacos.
Tacos. So
Yeah.
if Rob wanted to start a taco business and he invested capital gain eligible dollars into a fund, and the fund then started this business in a zone, and he followed the rules. Sorry about that. And he followed the rules and he held that taco business for 10 years or more and sold it. The sales price on that business would not be subject to capital gains tax. Same thing we just talked about. 5-year
Yeah.
deferral, 10% reduction, unless you're in a rural area, so 30%. So if Rob's doing a taco business in the burbs and it's in a rural zone, Smyrna, somewhere else, it's 30%. And he would not be subject to things. The only six businesses that are forbidden. There are sin businesses, SIN. There are 6 things you can't do in an OZ, which most people are not doing this. So it's not overly relevant to them. But again, you can do any business except for what was deemed under the new markets tax code to be sin businesses. And this is like 40 years ago. So it's kind of humorous to see what the sins were back then. You can't have
Yeah.
a golf course. You can't have a racetrack for like horses where people are betting. You can't have a
Yeah.
casino. You can have a hotel, you can have food, but you can't have a casino, the casino floor.
Yeah.
You can't have a liquor store for off-site consumption. We could have a bar and a restaurant,
Right.
That's fine, but we can't have a liquor store where you're actually taking liquor off site to consume. The other two that are humorous are you can't have a massage parlor. Apparently, back then they didn't have hand and stone and kind of
Yeah.
legitimate massage parlors. And you can't have hot tub sales. I don't know why that's the sin, but apparently back then it was. So no hot tub sales. So other than those six things, again, massage parlor, golf course, racing track, casino, liquor store, hot tub, you can have any business you want in a zone as long as you follow the rules, which the rules are not that tricky to follow. If we hold that business, grow it, sell it after 10 years, we do not pay capital gains tax on that sale. So to your point, it's not just real estate. It's, just to use real estate as an example, if we built a building, the building would get it. But anything we're doing on that site, think about it. Elevator maintenance, landscaping, painting, carpeting, any of that stuff that somebody's coming in to do that work, it is possible to structure that business as an OZ business that would be entitled to those benefits. So a large tenant that is going to invest a lot of money in their space, sure. Somebody that's doing like manufacturing, the manufacturer, sure. Somebody that's got a restaurant, a nail business, a chocolate factory, daycare, optician, anything that you would think of, like if you closed your eyes and think about like a strip center that you drive by, any of those businesses would be eligible to structure themselves as an OZ. And if their business was located within an OZ and they followed the rules, they would get that benefit. Okay.
Yeah. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And I understand under the big beautiful bill, it's kind of picking up on industry and OZs that they are trying to incentivize the onshoring of manufacturing. And is there any additional benefits for that?
Yeah, so that's again, Delaware has some good manufacturing in certain places. You think about like Newark, you used to have Chrysler plant, where the University of Delaware is doing the STAR campus. Other areas, DuPont, bigger Gore-Tech. You sort of think about kind of those manufacturing type operations. Well, again, under the one big beautiful bill, separate from OZs, they would get 100% bonus depreciation for doing manufacturing. Okay, that's good. They would like that. Why? Because it offsets their net operating income and they pay less tax. So people love that. Most people, unless you're a glutton for punishment, you like paying tax. Okay. If they did the same deal in an OZ and they ultimately sold the factory. So again, over time, DuPont sold factories in Delaware, stuff along 95. They change in use, whatever the hell it is. When they sell, if they sold for more than they built it for, they would have gain. Well, if you do that in an OZ, you would not have gain on that sale and there's no depreciation recapture. So the ability to match kind of this 100% bonus depreciation along with the OZ benefits is very powerful economically. In particular, those plants, depending on what we're talking about, can be hundreds of millions of dollars. If we're talking about a data center that may or may not qualify as manufacturing, like a data center of any scale, can be in the billions. And so you're talking about a lot of depreciation that can be allocated and utilized for purposes of sheltering tax. Investors tend to like that a lot and are driven to look for those deals. So that's why these OZ deals can be very, beneficial to the investor. Not every deal is great. And as many have likely heard, the OZ does not take a bad deal and make it good. It takes a good deal and makes it extremely good. Okay. Right. So you don't, kind of the lipstick on the pig kind of thing. You're not going to take a bad economic deal and make it good. It doesn't work that way. If you're not making money, you're not making money. But if on a good deal, these extra benefits are extremely good. Like I want to sort of segue Dan Bond, who's working on some really interesting things in Milford. He's asking, hey, some states have additional benefits for investing in OZ zones to incentivize more investment. Is the state of Delaware considering additional state benefits for OZ projects? Patty, I don't know if you can unmute yourself. That's a Patty question. Here she comes. So Patty, you aware of anything going on in Delaware that Dan's asking about, like the state would create a separate class of benefit? The one state that I'm aware of that's doing this and has successfully is Ohio. Ohio has said to Ohio residents, hey, if you're an Ohio resident and you invest in an OZ, we will give you, I think it's up to $100,000 of offset to state income tax. So they're incenting Ohio residents to invest in local businesses and or real estate projects because they're getting this $100,000 off. Any talk of that in Delaware?
So I feel bad that I'm going to toss this back to Rob. I'm not aware of anything right now happening, but I do think it would have to work its way through the state legislature. I don't think it's something the state could just say we're going to do, and they'd have to attach a fiscal note, some estimate of what that would cost the state. Rob, have you heard of anything like that yet?
Not specifically in tandem with Opportunity Zone 2.0, but I think it's a great idea. And I think it's something we should work on. Dan, I think I'll be bugging you right after this, and we should get moving on it. While we're in legislature right now, I think it's really important to get out ahead of this.
So some of the, like, again, the negative commentary, Rob, is like, look, this is like a rich person's program to get richer. You have to have capital gains in order to start the engine, and you got to invest those in a fund. Funds aren't that hard to put together. It takes like a day. It's a couple $1,000s, but a couple $1,000 for some it's relevant. And so you sort of say, well, okay, how do we, make this more, egalitarian so that everybody can invest? And so there was some conversation during the Senate and House deliberations on OB3 about, should we allow ordinary income to be invested? That would allow anybody to invest as opposed to just capital gains. And there was that conversation, and the ordinary income was in the House bill that got removed in the Senate side. So again, a state, if they were interested, could probably allow for that at a state level, legislatively. And so, that's something to consider, because a lot of people are kind of boxed out because they don't really have capital gains to invest, but they might have ordinary income that they put aside some dollars that they can invest in their own business or in, a project. So worth thinking about.
Right. And before I go off to mute again, I'm going to ask Brad, did you see Andrew Harton's question about, are there a minimum amount of dollars that should be invested?
So the short answer is, Andrew, no, there's not a minimum. It's totally up to the, kind of the deal and the investor, period. That said, most sponsors, most developers in a real estate deal, they look for a minimum level of investment. That minimum tends to be, depending on who it is, where it is, $100,000 to $250,000 to $500,000 of capital gains, which is why I was saying it boxes some people out because they don't have that much. So it's not that you need a minimum. It's just that you're going to need to find a deal that allows for smaller increments if that's what you're interested in. Flipping the conversation on, as a developer, what's kind of the minimum? I've done deals at $700,000. Somebody was buying a shore property down the Atlantic City. That's the smallest deal, and we're doing billion-dollar deals. So it ranges. There's no real minimum. If you're buying in a zone, you're creating a business, it can work at whatever, but it can work at $5,000, $10,000, whatever dollars. What you want to balance, though, is the cost of legal and accounting worth the potential upside that I would sell this thing for after 10 years and not pay tax? If the legal and accounting charges are going to be more than that, then you'd sort of say, well, why am I doing this? So, there's a pragmatic, I'd say, a deal, typical deals are on the multifamily side, call it 20 million up to 120 million, give or take, the typical. But that doesn't mean that I've worked on deals where somebody was doing, 8 units in Philadelphia in a zone. We created the fund. We created the lower tier qualified opportunity zone business for a couple $1,000s. They had friends and family investing in the deal, and they got it done in a couple of weeks. So time is not your friend in legal fees. So the shorter we can compress the time period, the better that is. Same thing on the accounting side. So no real minimum, just deal pragmatics of what's worth doing. How quickly can you get it done, and who are you raising money from, and are there securities implications from that? Most of the time, sponsors want to make sure that they have accredited investors so that they're not tripping over federal and state securities rules, that if you don't have accredited investors, you need to file certain things with with the SEC and with your state securities commission.
Great. Well, kind of changing gears here. I think we've answered a few questions from the audience. And this is a personal question. I mentioned to you, I've done 2 OZ deals. We're on the cusp of doing a third one. We had an investor in it that has cap gains that requested to be an opportunity zone project, and we're about to close on all that. We have it all we have 3 different buildings under contract, all in an OZ as one project. How should we approach this now that we're on the cups? Is 2026 right now? Is it worth waiting until 2027 or the end of this year to be an OZ 2.0? And I'm in Wilmington, full disclosure. What happens if my area gets pulled out?
Okay, so there's a lot to
That's a
unpack
lot to
there.
unpack there. I know. Just
Yeah, but that's what people are going through.
right.
A, as the sponsor, should I wait? B, as the investor, should I wait? Okay.
Right.
So good question, and people are thinking about that right now. The variables in that question are as follows. Like we started with, OZ 2.0 does not start until 1/1/27. Okay.
Right.
So if you as an investor or you as a sponsor developer have an agreement of sale now that closes now, you can't wait. You're not going to be able to wait. So that's
Yeah.
number one. Like, what's your agreement of sale say time wise?
We have flexibility in our case. Let's assume that. Yeah.
As well, of course, because you're a smart guy, you get that.
Yeah.
So flexibility is key, optionality key. So that's part one. Like, what's your agreement of sale say? Part two is on the investor side. When's my capital gain? And am I an individual or am I an entity? Why do I say that? Well, under OZ rules, if we're an individual, so if Brad sells, I feel like Deion Sanders here, I'm referring to myself in the third party. If Brad sells, stock in a company today, individual, my time period starts today. So I would have 8 months. I would have 6 months from today, 180 days. So we're in March, so call it April, May, June, July, August, September of 26. So as an individual, I have 180 days from the sale day. I would not get into 2.0. I wouldn't have the ability to do that. Okay, so depending on when your gain is, if your gain is anytime before like July 5th of this year, you're stuck in 1.0. You won't have the flexibility to get into 2.0. As we get later in the year, if I sold something in August, well, August and 6 months is, September, October, November, December, January, February. Well, then I'd have flexibility to wait until 1/1/27 to invest it in a fund. So again, am I an individual? Does the 180 days take me into 2.0 maybe or 1.0? If I'm an entity in 2026 and I sell something, the entity rules are still 180 days, but not from the sale event. It's 180 days from when the tax return for the entity is due without extension. So if we're in an entity, so if we're in an entity and we sell in 26, that tax return is not due until 27. The individual would then get 180 days from March 15th of 27, which is like September of 27. So if we're an individual, you have to look at the 180 days. If you're an entity deal and it's now, you're going to be able to get into 27 as a K1 investor in that entity, and you can get into 2.0. Okay, so that's the developer. Do I want to wait? Can I wait? The owner, investor, do I have the flexibility, individual or entity? Okay, so that's one cluster of issues.
Yeah.
The second cluster of issues is, as you indicated, okay, right now we know what the zones are in 1.0. They've been set in stone since, kind of 2018. Currently, HUD and Treasury right now, as we speak right now, are working on the maps for 2.0. There was just some census data that came out at the end of January 29th, from ACS. That's the group that kind of, aggregates, whatever. That data was announced. Treasury actively looking at that data along with HUD to create maps of all 50 states with eligible areas based on what I was talking about before. This 70% of median family income and or 20% of the poverty. It has to be at least 20% poverty rate. So those maps right now are being put together. Treasury and HUD thinking about what are those areas based on and they're superimposing that onto a map. Okay, those maps will likely be delivered to the governors of all 50 states, in the next, call it 45 days. I'm thinking kind of mid-April to end April, the kind of government shutdown affects that a little bit. So mid-April, the governors will get those maps. They don't just rubber stamp what they get. They have 2-3 months, call it to the end of July, to look at those maps, and they're limited to 25% of what's on the map, okay? Or in small states, 25 zones. So if you got 100 zones, you'd be limited to 25. 25% of 100 would be 25. If you had 60, 25% of 60 is below that number 25 until you get 25. So 25 is the minimum number of zones, but you only get 25% of the, total. That was gibberish, but hopefully people were following that. So
I'm following.
The governors are going to get these maps. The governors are going to have 3 months to decide which of the eligible areas are going to become actual zones in 2.0. So that's going to all happen by, call it July of this year. Given your druthers to your question, Rob, if you could wait until August when these maps are solidified, then you're not guessing at, I'm going to buy something, I'm not going to buy something, is it in, is it not in? That's when you would want to buy and or transact. That said, I applaud kind of DSB and Patty and the group on most states will not do what Delaware is doing. Most states will not have a solicitation on tell us why your project makes sense. And they won't get that kind of input from the developer community. Most states will call the likely suspects, the cities and some towns, and say, what do you think? Where do you want these zones based on these eligibility criteria? Here's the map. Tell us. But then at the end of the day, the governor is going to be the one with his team making that decision, or her team, in your instance, his team. So it's great that Delaware is asking for that input to sort of say, well, why is my site relevant? Why it qualifies? What are you doing? It allows a developer to say, look, I've got this, and this together to question. You can advocate for why your site should be ripe for development and how it helps the community and what the health outcomes are going to be. So it gives the developer a chance to raise his or her hand and say, here's why I'm relevant. Please pick me, as opposed to just pot luck on, okay, well, you're going to be eligible or not, and you're just dictated to. The other thing I'd mention there is there are a couple of places one can go to look at indicatively. It's not totally done, but indicatively where the census data is going to show eligible areas. What do I mean? There are three groups. So Jimmy Atkinson has a group. Another group is EIG. Another group is Novogradac. EIG is a think tank that does public policy. Novogradac is an accounting firm that does a lot of seminars on tax kind of exotica. And Jimmy Atkinson has a group called, OpportunityZones.com, where they have webinars and seminars, et cetera. Each of the three of them have put together mapping. They didn't draw the map. They took the census data that came out at the end of January. They, extrapolated that onto what's the 70% of median family income and what's the poverty rate. And they're showing on those maps what the likely areas of eligibility that Treasury and HUD are going through right now to make that determination. So you can go on their maps. They're a little bit different, but they're the same. And you can see kind of indicatively, where you're looking, if you're hunting for projects, where those zones are. So again, not surprisingly, in Delaware, it's areas, so far on this updated map, it's like areas around Sharpton. It's areas around Seaford. It's areas around Georgetown, Harrington, Dover, Smyrna, as well as Newark and Wilmington and parts of, as you get on the waterfront, going towards Chester. So those are the areas where, at least indicatively on the maps, you can sort of see where the eligible areas are. And again, that's not Brad's map. That's, these third parties that have hired people to demographically show pictorially what's eligible. So if you looked at, OpportunityZones.com, it'll take you to their mapping technology, and you can sort of type in an address and see. It's almost like a Google map. Once you're on there, you can make it bigger or smaller. So if you were hunting in Wilmington, you could see what areas are likely eligible. Eligible is, though, going to the governor for picking the 25%. Just because you're eligible doesn't mean the governor is going to pick that particular place. That's where the advocacy with Patty's group and others becomes very relevant. Here's why I think my site should qualify.
Right. Well, I would think in 2.0, just talking out loud, that Kent and Sussex are going to be big winners here because they're going to automatically be in the rural set qualification, right? They're under 50,000 people, and even around Dover, you'll probably still count as rural.
Yes and no. I agree with what you said.
Yeah.
There's a reason, though, they're rural. So you have to get a group of investors to sort of say, well, there's not many people here. If I'm starting a restaurant, do I want to put that in the middle of Wilmington or do I want to put it in Dover? There's pluses and minuses to both. As we had said before, Daniel, who's asking these questions, he's focusing in Milford, small town, but they're growing, and he's part of that growth. So he wants to see stuff there. There's another guy that had put a brewery in. So again, but I'd helped before in Milford. So it depends on perspective. Everyone's going to see a little bit different thing. You got to convince investors that whatever your project is, wherever the geography is, sure, you're getting better benefits, but there's a reason for that. It's harder to make that, that investment make sense. So you'd have to have a good investment that pencils to make it a good investment. And then on top of that, same thing on if you're building multifamily, is there enough of a population in some of these areas, Milford, Seaford, to make multifamily development, like if we're building townhouses for rent or we're building a community, affordable housing or market rate housing? Is there enough of a population increase that can pay what you would expect in order to get a return of an 8, 9, 10? So is that 1,500? Is it 2,000 a month? Is that too much for that area? That's where the developers' chops come in handy on what can I pencil to make it make sense.
Yeah, what really pencils out. Ultimately, these deals have to pencil to get the full benefit.
Exactly.
Exactly. Just stepping back a few steps too with the question about our investment here. So let's say I wait till August to close, and the OZ does move the line. I can't be in 2.0. I'll close that year and get it under. I can still do OZ 1.0, right? Because I close for the end of the year. Really, the benefit to the investor though is that they're not going to get the reduction in their basis, right? But the only benefit that will remain for them is if they hold it 10 years, there's no cap gains on the sale, right? Is there no other benefit outside of that?
The depreciation benefit that we talked about on no recapture. But again,
on no
to
recapture.
me,
So you can claim all the depreciation like you would. There's no reduction in that basis, but then there's no cap gains at the end of 10 years.
Correct.
Got it.
Footnote that with the following. So what you just said is true. People should latch on to that and what we just confirmed. Okay.
Yeah.
For 1.0 investors, the original program that got started in 2018, it's not coming to a close yet, but it's closing to new investment on 12/31/2026, absent some change at Treasury. So 12/31/2026, the window shuts to new investment. And the deferral period for 1.0 investments ends, meaning when people invested in 1.0 project,
they get to
pay the tax that they deferred at the end of 2026 with their 26 return that'll be April of 27.
Right.
Okay. So if Rob had invested $1 million of capital gains in a fund and the fund invested in a real estate deal or his taco business, Rob owes on $1 million to the federal government, round numbers, like 30%. Okay, so on $1 million, that'll be $300,000. Okay, what the rules say is the tax that's due at the end of 2026 with your 2026 return, because we deferred it till the end, is the lower of the actual investment, in my example, $1 million, and the fair market value of the investment. Okay, so if the real estate or the business has gone up in value, then we pay on our investment, no more. That's the max. If, on the other hand, many projects got stalled, COVID, lack of, kind of supply chain issues on the construction costs, lack of banks being willing to lend, interest rates being too high, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if the project has stalled or it's behind or the pro forma is off, well, remember, it's the lower of what you invested and fair market value of what the investment is. That fair market value could be less in many cases. You need an appraisal, suggesting you'd want an appraisal, not just making this stuff up, because if the IRS comes and you're making it up, that's not such a good idea or a bad idea. And so having an appraisal say, hey, here's what the property is worth now, here's what your pro rata share is, and oh, by the way, because you're a limited partner in this, you have really no control on the ability to sell your interests. And your lack of control on that further reduces the value of what you invested. So having that study done by the project or by yourself is relevant, because it's highly likely in the case of a stalled project that you're going to be paying less in tax than just your investment times the applicable rate. Okay, so if you're in that 1-0 situation, just think about what I just said, and I'm happy to talk about it, more thereafter, because we're getting this 5-minute, ding in the background.
Yeah. At the 5-minute mark, I think Patty wants to share our contact info. I know we didn't get to all the questions.
I think she just did.
Oh,
or
yeah,
maybe so.
That's okay.
I
I can put it back up. I just wanted you to both know that it was up. I'll put it right back up.
And we're going to keep talking, Patty, for the next 3 hours on this stuff, because
yeah. Well,
so
go
I did
ahead.
want to mention to the University of Delaware people, first of all, go Hens.
Go UD. Yeah.
Second of all, it's a weird thing that happened. Originally, the maps that came out 6 months ago, the Star campus, I believe, was not on those maps, meaning for whatever reason, demographically, either because there's no population there and it wasn't part of a census tract or whatever, when you looked at the maps that came out, it didn't show up, which would mean that for 2.0, it wouldn't be eligible, which isn't, if one's a developer, not that the university's doing it, but they're partnering with others, that's not so good, because you'd be stuck in 1.0 and you couldn't get into 2.0. The new maps, if you go onto Jimmy's map or EIG's map or, Novogradic's, I looked this morning, the Star campus is on the map as a eligible zone. Again, that doesn't mean it's going to be picked for 2.0. It just means that it's eligible, which is much better than not being eligible. And so, the university, I'm happy to talk to you guys offline, but advocating with Patty, advocating with the governor's office, using your government relations apparatus to make sure that the governor is aware of that and what your plans are, because there's been some amazing things done on the Star campus. I've been down there. I've spoken to folks down there. It's incredible. What it used to be when I worked at 896 Liquors was the Chrysler plant 1,000 years ago when I was at the university. Now there's active, kind of engineering labs and buildings and a hotel. So it's extraordinary what's gone on there. Kudos to the group. But just you're in that zone now, which is good. You're going to want to advocate for making sure that that's picked, not only as eligible, but actual. Okay. Commercial there. Sorry.
Great. Patty, is there any more questions we should address? I know we have 3 minutes left. If not, I can always throw one more out.
So no, the only one that I would ask Brad to clarify on his comments just now is my understanding is that the reason that Treasury and HUD are looking at those lists that were put together by Novogradic and the other groups is that Treasury could still come up with a regulation that changes the criteria. And so it's the Treasury list that we really have to wait for. Those others are somewhat speculative. Is that true from your perspective?
I'm going to change the words a little bit, Patty. It's not so much that they could change the regulation as to what's eligible. That's like congressional. But what they use in order to determine areas is a little bit up for interpretation. What do I mean? The statute says 70% of median family income, 20% or more poverty level. That's clear, unambiguous, easy. The statute, OB3, does not say you need to use 2026 census data. So there's some thought in the community about, well, Treasury is not limited to the most recent census data. Treasury could use other data if they so were inclined. And so, to your point, It's indicative. That's why I keep saying these maps from Jimmy and from, Novogradac and EIG, they're indicative. It'll give you kind of a good sense of where the places are that are relevant. But until Treasury issues their map along with HUD, it's not official. And so you're going to want to wait to see that. You can see where they are most likely, but the edges might be a little bit different than kind of what's on that map. Just, as an FYI, because of that shrinking of the criteria from 80% to 70%, there's a massive amount of, there's going to be much less zones. Okay, so in OZ 1.0, there were like 8,764 zones in the United States. Okay, in 2.0, there's only going to be 6,514 zones. So 25% less, which is much less areas that are going to be eligible, for these benefits. In California, like for instance, that's 261 less zones. That's a lot. And in many states, it's like 35-40% less areas that are going to be eligible. Delaware is going to be not as affected because we tend to be a little bit smaller. So these bigger states, are going to be hit pretty hard on the amount of areas that are eligible for this benefit. So again, you could debate that policy, whether it's good or bad. That's the reality of what the statute says. And so to your point, it's worth knowing where these sites are indicatively, but until Treasury and HUD sort of say, this is it, it's kind of open to a little bit of debate and potential. You're going to see something on that map that might not make it, and or other sites that might make it because of kind of tweaking at the edges.
Thank you, Brad. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Rob, did you have any last minute question that you wanted to be sure we got included here?
I think we've covered a lot. I could keep going. I certainly have a dozen more, but I think we're at time. Yeah.
We'll come back next week. We'll come back next week, Patty, and do that.
That'd be great.
Let's
Brad,
do
you
it
were
again.
awesome.
Yeah.
I certainly learned a lot today. Thank you so much, Brad.
Sure.
Again, I could keep going on for hours on this because I think it's interesting because I keep thinking of what if situations here, but I really appreciate your time. This has been awesome.
Hey, Rob, I'll put you in the,
you,
I was going to say, I'll put Rob in the OZ geek category like me, which is good.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. We're all three OZ geeks. Would you be willing to do this again if we, again, once those maps come out, I think it'll be really an important time to have some Q&A.
Yes. Yeah. Look, Patty, the last time when I drove down, like it was a bit of a drive. It was like 2.5 hours, wherever the hell it was, to get down to wherever we had it. And then we went to
we were downstate.
So we went to an inn afterwards, and somebody ordered, what the hell was it? Like Hershey chocolate beer. So that was like the first time I had that, which is crazy. And it's still in my head.
It wasn't me, for the record.
No, I can't remember what I had for this morning, but I remember that like 7 years ago. Crazy.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Delaware. Appreciate you more than you know.
All right.
No wonder.
Goodbye.
Yes.
Tyou, Brad.
See you guys.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Pleasure.
Thanks.